Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Mahmoud Abdel Ghaffar, a research associate here at the Bahrain Center for Strategic International and Energy Studies. And on behalf of the center, welcome to this virtual edition of Think Talks entitled Bahrain-India Economic Relations, Past and Present. Bahrain and India have historic bilateral ties that span energy, trade, investment, education, and beyond. And here today, we'll be discussing how they can be expanded. Joined with us today to discuss this topic at hand is an esteemed panel from the Observer Research Foundation and other organizations within Bahrain. We will have our welcoming remarks from Derasat Executive Director, Dr. Ahmed, and His Excellency, Ambassador Suri. Dr. Ahmed, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much. Your Excellencies and honorable guests, I would like to begin by thanking the Observer Research Foundation in India, ORF, for organizing this event with the Bahrain Center for Strategic International and Energy Studies, Derasat. The event today highlights a key element in Bahraini-Indian relations as it sheds light on past and present economic relations between Bahrain and India. This event comes at challenging times globally as we continue to combat ramifications of COVID-19 and its socio-economic effects. We cannot give the deeply rooted historical ties between Bahrain and India their due. We share several common traits and have a multifaceted relationship represented by many professionals residing in the Kingdom of Bahrain. Dear honorable guests, these ties were also supported by the establishment of Bahrain-India High Joint Commission in 2015, which held its third meeting in April this year in the Indian capital, New Delhi. Numbers reflect the amount of trade and exchange between the two countries reaching $893.3 million in 2020. This is in light of the Indian agricultural industry, which has reached approximately 31% of local production, thus offering its expertise to other states in the field of food security. In addition, Bahrain's expertise in the field of finance and investment offers a range of opportunities for Indian investors. Furthermore, the two countries have signed a wide range of agreements in a number of fields and joint ventures. This virtual Think Talk aims to shed light on economic relations between Bahrain and India, past and present, to highlight the current state of affairs and the future of the strategic partnership between the Kingdom of Bahrain and the Republic of India. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. Before we begin, I just wanted to let our viewers know that I'll be introducing every panelist. They will have up to 10 minutes to speak, followed by a conversation session between the panelists. And then finally, we will open the floor to questions from the audience. Oh, actually, we have Ambassador Suri joining us now. Ambassador Suri, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. And sorry about the few tech issues. I have the pleasure of joining this meeting from the Dubai Expo Center, where I am with a delegation, and I guess that shows our strong interest in promoting the relationship with the Gulf. And in fact, I thought that some of the issues that we were discussing a few minutes back in our meeting with Minister Reem Al-Hashmi were so relevant to the conversation that we plan to have with Derasat, between Derasat and ORF, because really, some of the issues cut across the national boundaries. We are in this COVID era, and I think the challenges that it has thrown up to travel, to a return of Indians to Bahrain or to UAE in this case, the opportunities that we have, the fact that we can connect in this manner, no matter where we are, despite the occasional technical glitches, and the possibilities that are there to grow the relationship. At the Observer Research Foundation, we've tried to do our bit. We started the Arabian Sea Dialogues last year. And the idea really was to have these conversations between our teams at ORF, people from different walks of society, with counterparts in Gulf countries, and with one single objective. I feel that over the decades, And over the centuries, there's been traditionally a very, very close relationship between India and the Gulf. It transcends just ties of trade or commerce. There's a natural bond. And some of these bonds were particularly strong with the city of Bombay or Mumbai. I felt, having served in the Gulf, I felt that perhaps over the years, some of those bonds with Bombay are not as strong as they once were. When you talk to people of an older generation, you hear that Bombay was the place that they would go to for education, for healthcare, for tourism, and for commerce. But as the countries grew, maybe attentions focused elsewhere. And we consciously decided from the Observer Research Foundation to house this dialogue in our Mumbai Center and to see whether we could revive those traditional links with Mumbai and indeed with India across different geographies. So I'm delighted that we're having this first collaboration with Derasat in Bahrain. It means a lot to us, the fact that one of the most reputed think tanks in the region is partnering with us in this conversation. We hope that this is going to be the starting point of a very fruitful relationship between ORF and Derasat. And certainly we hope that we are going to contribute from our side what we can to the ties between India and Bahrain, maybe come up with newer ideas, newer suggestions, find ways to connect young people who no longer look at each other but tend to look at the West. Can we create platforms for that? So there's a very wide canvas open, and I'm delighted that from our side, we have a wonderful panel with not only Ambassador Mohan Kumar, who has served in Bahrain and is much loved by many people in the country, but Ambassador Deepa Wadhwa, who has also extensive experience of the region. So yeah, I'm going to hand the floor back to you and wish you all the very best for the deliberations over the next hour or so.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, both of you, Dr. Ahmed and Ambassador Suri, for your welcome remarks. I wanted to introduce our esteemed panel before we begin speaking. Ambassador Deepa has been a distinguished career diplomat in the Indian Foreign Service. She was the first Indian woman to be appointed ambassador to a GCC state and then later in Japan. She has also been India's ambassador to Sweden, Latvia, and the Republic of Marshall Islands. Earlier, she served twice in China, besides stints in Switzerland and the Netherlands. Also joining us is Ambassador Dr. Mohan. Ambassador Dr. Mohan has had an astounding career in the Indian Foreign Service as well, lasting 36 years, which culminated in being India's ambassador in Paris. Under his watch, Indo-French strategic partnership was strengthened and consolidated further in spheres such as defense, space and nuclear solar energy, smart cities, and investments. Ambassador Kumar was also India's ambassador to the Kingdom of Bahrain, who also witnessed a lot of the strategically complex region. Joining us as well as Mr. Babu Rajan. Mr. Babu Rajan has played a pivotal role in development of the Kingdom of Bahrain for the past 4 decades. Starting with the Saudi-Bahrain Causeway, he has shaped modern infrastructure within the kingdom, such as Sheikh Khalifa Port, Airport Terminal Modernization, Al Muayyad Tower, Sheikh Isa Bridge, Sitra Bridge, and many other key infrastructure projects. He is regarded as a technical expert in the courts in Bahrain on various civil engineering-related issues, such as building collapse disputes between clients, consultants, contractors, and suppliers. Also joining us today is Mr. Yusuf Salahudeen. He is a renowned businessman, researcher, and writer whose name is also often associated with aviation history and trade. He contributed to philanthropy work and is an active member of some committees of the Bahrain Chamber of Commerce and Industry and other associations within the kingdom. He was born in Manama and continued his higher studies in Egypt and Cyprus and became the first Bahraini pilot to receive the FAA Commercial Aviation Certificate. He established his own business in 1972 and takes great interest in local, regional, and international events and writes some articles in Arabic and English in newspapers such as Akhbar Khalij, Al-Ayam, and Gulf Daily News. Dr. Omar He's the Director of Studies and Research at the Derasat. He previously worked as an assistant professor in economics at George Mason University, as well as being a member of the Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell's Joint Advisory Board. Like I said before, each panelist will have up to 10 minutes to speak, and then we will open a conversation between the panel members. And finally, we will conclude with questions from our audience. Ambassador Deepa, we will begin with you. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible. It's really a great honor to be here and to participate in this webinar organized by Derasat Bahrain and ORF. I have to thank my colleague, Ambassador Navdeep Suri, for actually calling me and saying that telling me about this event. And I was very happy to join. I thank Dr. Ahmed for also inviting me to this event. I find that it's a very eminent panel of experts. The only comment that I did make before was that everybody here is an expert on Bahrain, led, I think, by Dr. Mohan Kumar from our side. I have to tell you something before I start, that I was already in the GCC when Ambassador Mohan Kumar called me and said, look, I have an opportunity to come. What do I think? What do you think about it? And I said, grab it. And I know he has no regrets. It's a very special part of the world for all of us. And so I think, I've been very happy to be associated with it, and also very happy to be associated with today's virtual Think Talk. But what I did say was that I would talk generally about India and the GCC, because, there are people who will be able to speak with much greater expertise on Bahrain itself. And in talking so, I tend to go into history a little bit. And there are two reasons for this. One of the reasons, of course, I got to know this region very well when I was, I served as a diplomat in the region. But there's another reason also. I know this region from the other shore, because I'm from Kerala. And I think this entire part of the world, it's the first experience of Indians for many people is from Kerala. And the bonds between Kerala and the GCC really go back thousands of years. And these are our bonds of brotherhood. In fact, not only brotherhood, I think that the identity of Kerala has been so formed by the Gulf. And this is something I like to reiterate, because very often as we go on, I think particularly young people forget this. The relationship between India and the Gulf is not something that started now. It's really a continuum that goes about 4,000 years into history. It starts actually, when you look back, at least what we know is between the Indus Valley civilization and the Dilmun civilization, which is what is Bahrain now perhaps is part of the world, and then on to Mesopotamia. And even in that time, there were two important aspects of our relationship. One was trade, and we trade in luxury goods, foodstuffs from both sides. The other thing was the diaspora, in the sense that, traders and mariners, they crossed the Arabian Sea. And what they also did was, because they were dependent on the monsoon winds, they had to spend long times on both shores. So you had Arabs who lived certainly in Malabar, in Kerala, from where I come. There were settlements there, as they were settlements on the other shores, on the side of the Gulf. There were Indian settlers there. So, this kind of exchange among people is something which really goes deep back into antiquity. It is not something that is very new. And since I started off by talking about Kerala, I should say two little things here, these are just little nuggets which always I find very interesting to share with people. One is that, I don't know how many of you know, and probably Mr. Baburajan certainly knows, that the Muslims of Kerala are known as Maplas. And you know what Mapla means? Mapla means son-in-law. So the Arabs, when they came to stay, they married with the local women, and they were welcomed with great respect as the sons-in-law of Kerala, and therefore Mapla. This was a very great respect, a mutual respect that there was among our two people. And then when you go down into history, and I quickly want to go through this and not belabor this, is really when you come to the Europeans coming, because trade was always, I think, managed by the Arabs. Another important thing is that, Islam went first to South Asia, during the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. While he was there, the first mosque came up in Kerala, and this was completely through peace and through actually conviction and faith. So these are the relations between our two countries. And then you come to the European times, and you find that when the Portuguese came, they tried to push out the Arab traders, and they wanted to take over the trade, because the important trade was spices and foodstuff. I mean, that's a very important part of the trade. And they tried to push out the traders, but apparently the Hindu king of Calicut, who's called the Zamorin, he decided that, he trusted the Arabs much more than these new Europeans on the scene. And in fact, he did not permit it. And there were many wars later which happened, sea battles, which were with the Arabs and the Indians on one side against the Europeans on the other. So this is part of our history. So, when Prime Minister Modi, very early in his first term, he talked about link west, look west, and talked about the Gulf as our extended neighborhood. He was talking not only geography, he was talking history, he was talking about strategic convergences between our parts of the world. And, he actually meant it in the sense that you can see the importance that has been given to this region. After South Asia, I cannot think of another part of the world where India has engaged with this intensity as we have with the GCC. Our Prime Minister has visited each one of the countries. Our Foreign Minister has, I think, visited them several times, our National Security Advisor, several ministers. There have been joint commission meetings. We have established all kinds of mechanisms to actually work on the relationship. We have gone into areas where we never went before, or intensification of relations in areas such as defense. Security has become very important. So there have been many pillars. And I think, for India, certainly, and the government at this point of time, the GCC is really very much an area of focus. Now, let me go again into the subject of today's talk, which is to do with the economic relationship between our two countries. And I mentioned two of the pillars from the past, that was trade and diaspora. To that, I think we have to add now, which has become one of the most important pillars of our relationship, which is energy. And the reason for that has been that, the major reserves of energy of both oil and gas that are there in this region, India being, resource energy deficient country. What it did find was that over the years, the consumption grew, as did the economy grow, and its imports had to grow as a consequence of this. And of course, where better and which better source of imports than our neighboring the Gulf region. So you will find that from about the early 90s, I think, or the early 80s, when we imported about 40% of our needs, we now import about 85% of our needs. Of this, half of our imports come from the GCC. Therefore, the GCC and the Persian Gulf is extremely, extremely important for our energy security. And energy security is linked with development. The importance of energy security, I think, is next to only security in terms of military terms for any country for its development. And so this has been a very important part of our relationship and shall continue to be so in the years to come. The second pillar of the relationship is trade and investment. I talked about trade and investment in the earlier times, but I think what has happened is that with the growth of the Indian economy, what we have seen is that trade between the two, India and the GCC as a bloc has grown, particularly in the last 2 or 3 decades. And actually today, the GCC is the largest trading bloc insofar as India is concerned, even surpasses the EU. So that is the importance of the GCC insofar as trade is concerned. I mean, I think in the last year, we've been slightly affected by the pandemic. So it's been about two-way trade has been about $120 billion. But before that, it had gone up to about $140 billion. And we do hope that after the pandemic, it will again be able to regain the numbers that it has lost. So there is trade, then there is investment. Now, this is a very interesting area where I think perhaps India had some kind of, initially, some kind of feeling, certainly from the countries that I dealt with, that there could be more investment from the GCC because, of the large sovereign funds that were there into India. But we're seeing that happen. And I was very interested to see recently that during the pandemic, actually, there have been some very, very major investments into India. Now, these investments into India are in the key areas that are very important to India. There's infrastructure, there is power. These are areas of interest, of great of priority to India. But I think what we can see in the time to come is that as India tries to develop as a manufacturing and industrial base, that we will see more investments from this region into India. This is actually a two-way process. You also have outgoing investments into the Middle East, as I'm sure many of our friends here will be able to talk about specific investments, which I really don't want to go into. So, but this is happening. So it is a two-way street. The importance of investments is, as you know, one of the effects of the pandemic has been the rejigging, really, so to speak, of our supply, the global value chains. And I think in this rejigging, we will have to see both the GCC and the India play a greater role and a greater mutually supportive role, and particularly starting with investments. The third area within trade investment, and I think third I would like to talk about is really EPC contracts. I find that Mr. Baburajan is here, and I'm sure he's aware of the presence of Indian companies in EPC contracts in the GCC. And this, again, is a growing trend. And I think, this is an area where we have been helped by our major tycoons who are already there in the Middle East, and also by leading Indian companies, where India has been very happy to partner the GCC in the major projects that has had in various areas. It's been infrastructure, it's to do with water, and so on. Right. The third, and quickly, and the third pillar I would like to talk about before I end is the diaspora. I spoke about the Indian communities there. This has grown from about 1 million in the 1980s to about 8.5 million here. We cross all sort of segments, from the tycoons to professionals to technicians to blue collar workers, lots of professionals, and these certainly are important as important to the Middle East as they are, as a matter of fact, to India, because as you know, their remittances are very important and form about 3% of the Indian GDP. So I will just stop at this as saying these are the major trends. And then I think as to what the future holds, we can speak as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input, Dr. Ambassador Deepa. You have covered a lot of bases, actually, that's helped give a very strong overview of India-GCC relations. So now we will continue with Ambassador Mohan. So, sir, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank ORF and Derasat for this opportunity. I also want to thank my colleague, Ambassador Deepa Gopalan, for, as you said, laying out that strong overview. So I can concentrate a little bit on Bahrain, since I spent quite a bit of time as ambassador there. I want to begin with a personal anecdote. I met His Majesty, the King of Bahrain, in 2011 to hand over my credentials. And truth be told, this was my first ambassadorship. I had never met royalty before, so I was shaking like a leaf, even though I was giving the impression of being a very calm diplomat and so on. But it was amazing how he put me at ease, and he talked about how he was surrounded by Indians since his birth and so on. And then I asked him a very innocent question. I said, Your Majesty, when was your last visit to India? He kind of smiled and said, I've never been to India. I thought to myself, oh my good God, I need to do something about this. And I'm absolutely delighted that whatever else I did or did not do as ambassador, I managed to take him on a state visit in 2014, which actually established the High Joint Commission between India and Bahrain. And now I'll concentrate on what the High Joint Commission has done. They met for the third time in April 2021, and there are a series of decisions. I will take off from where Ambassador Deepa Gopalan has left, because she talked about GCC India. I will obviously speak a little bit more about India and Bahrain. And we are convening or talking at a time when there is the 50th anniversary of India-Bahrain relations. And Bahrain happens to have the rotating presidency of the GCC, which is important. So my first point on trade, I think I want to appeal to Bahrain to find out whether an India-GCC FTA is still feasible or not, because it's been hanging fire for a long, long time. And this is a perfect opportunity for me to appeal to my Bahraini friends. You should consult with your other GCC partners and tell us whether this is a way out or not, because otherwise we've been talking about this for at least a decade. So that's the first. The second, and this is where I want to put forward a proposition, if you like. My assessment is that if India-GCC FTA is going to prove difficult, I genuinely think there must be a trilateral arrangement between India, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain. I want to treat Bahrain and Saudi Arabia as a single economic space. I want to underline the word economic. I understand they are two different countries, very friendly countries and so on, but I am trying to overcome the size aspect of Bahrain. I used to always joke in Bahrain that India is slightly bigger than Bahrain. You are 1.3 million, we are 1.3 billion, exactly 1,000 times more, that's all. So I'm trying to see whether we can form a joint economic space between Saudi Arabia, India, and Bahrain. This is because things are moving between India and Saudi Arabia. And I genuinely believe we can have greater economies of scale if we include Bahrain in this. So that's my first point, if you like. On investment, Ambassador Deepa Gopalan is absolutely right. There is potential for investment from Mumtalakat, from Bahrain. I think this should be pursued pronto. We should not delay. Equally, I find it fascinating that the Joint Commission has talked about establishing vaccine facilities in Bahrain. This is, I think, a tremendously useful idea because this is not the last pandemic. So we're going to have pandemics in the future. Again, if financing can be done by Saudi Arabia and we can invest, India can bring know-how, technical know-how and manufacturing know-how to make vaccines in Bahrain for the GCC. This would be a wonderful way of trying to see if we can mix and match our respective advantages and strengths and try and do this. India and Bahrain can do it as well. I'm just trying to see if we can get financing from elsewhere. But this I leave to my Bahraini friends. I think there are some things which are hanging fire, if you don't mind my mentioning it. One is the idea of investment in a food park in India, which will meet the food security needs of Bahrain. Very frankly, meeting the food security needs of Bahrain is in the abiding interest of India because we have a number of Indian nationals and the country is not so big. So really, this can be done very, very easily and it should be done. The second, we should also try and see if we can do things like the launch of a RuPay card, which was decided when Prime Minister Modi paid a visit to Bahrain, and try and see if these things can be expedited. There's talk on oil and gas, and I will again support what Ambassador Deepa Gopalan has said. The Saudi Aramco chairman now sits on the board of the Reliance company in India. And again, if we can look at trilateral cooperation of downstream and upstream oil refining and so on, I think it would be to the great advantage of the region. There has been the first meeting of the joint working group on renewable energy. And I'd like to congratulate Bahrain for joining the International Solar Alliance, with which I was closely associated when I was ambassador in Paris. We look forward to early ratification by Bahrain of the International Solar Alliance. This is an area, Bahrain, like India, is blessed with sunlight throughout the year. So this is something we must exploit. Bahrain has land, and we can really have a wonderful solar park, which will be the envy of the Gulf. This is my dream for Bahrain, and this is something that is eminently doable with the technology that is available in India and with the funds that is available in Bahrain. I also want to mention the political change that has happened in Bahrain for the help of the viewers. Those of us who served in Bahrain know the Crown Prince, who's now the Prime Minister of Bahrain. He is arguably the most liberal politician in the entire Gulf. This will have a profound impact on the ability of Bahrain to be open-minded when it comes to economics, trade, and investment. There is nobody better than Sheikh Salman, frankly. He used to be in charge of the EDB. He knows the working of economics inside out. So this is something that must be exploited by countries like India. I will perhaps finish with a couple of comments on security, because this is something that is proving to be an increasingly important area of cooperation between India and Bahrain. I'm delighted the Deputy National Security Advisors have talked to each other, but we must take it to the next level. There must be an institutionalized national security dialogue between Bahrain and India. This is my wish. I also believe maritime security and the concept of Indo-Pacific, Bahrain can help us. The Fifth Fleet is located in Bahrain. After a lot of toing and froing, finally India has managed to post a naval officer who now works in the combined maritime forces based in Bahrain. This is something which can actually lead to trilateral cooperation, India, Bahrain, and the Fifth Fleet. We can share our views on keeping the sea lanes of communication open between the Strait of Hormuz, Bahrain, and India. One last thing I would say, labor continues to be extremely important. Ambassador Gopalan mentioned that. I think the issue of linking e-migrate and the LMRA portal should not be delayed, because Bahrain has always been avant-garde in the Gulf when it comes to treatment of labor. The treatment of labor is one of the best in Bahrain. So we must encourage the linking of the e-migrate and LMRA portal so that we have details of Indians who come to the Gulf, to Bahrain, with proper contracts, with legal employment. It serves the interest of both Bahrain and India. Lastly, let's not leave out the new areas of cooperation like space. I think India can help Bahrain with not just making of nano satellites, but also launching those satellites. I read in the joint statement cooperation between ISRO and the Bahraini Space Cooperation Agency. I think this too must be done with an eye on the 21st century. So I'll stop here. I again thank you for your attention and look forward to questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Dr. Mohan. You covered not only just an overview, but you gaining from your experience both in Bahrain and the Gulf. You provided a lot of the modern, if you will, files or topics that are very important and crucial to Bahrain-India relations. So thank you very much for that. And especially your experience within Bahrain shows when you were mentioning specific individuals and different organizations within the country. So again, thank you very much for your intervention. And also thank you for staying on time as well. We appreciate that. So now we'll open the floor to Mr. Babu Rajan. Mr. Babu Rajan, the floor is yours, sir.
Let me start by expressing my thanks to Observer Research Foundation and the Derasat Bahrain for having me on this panel with eminent personalities like Mr. Yusuf Salahudeen, prominent Bahraini businessman, researcher, and writer. Ambassador Deepa Wadhwa, a distinguished career diplomat in the Indian Foreign Service, and the first woman to be the ambassador in any of the Gulf states. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, again, is a distinguished career diplomat in the Indian Foreign Service and the former Indian ambassador to the Kingdom of Bahrain. And Dr. Omar Ahmed Al-Ubaidly, Director Studies and Research Directorate, Derasat, and Mr. Mahmoud Abdul Ghaffar, Research Associate, Derasat's chairman and moderator of this webinar. The topic, deepening India-Bahrain cooperation, is close to my heart. I owe a lot to the leadership of Bahrain for not only hosting expats like me for such a long time and also allowing to work for the cause of the Society of Bahrain, and also thank the Indian government by honoring me with the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman, which is the highest civilian award to recognize the effort of non-resident Indians like me. I came at the end of 1979, joined in Saudi Arabia and moved to Bahrain in the early 80s to head the QAQC operations of the flagship project, the Bahrain Saudi Causeway. Ever since I am based in Bahrain and have been associated with all major construction projects in Bahrain from that time onwards. As you know, the foundation is the most important factor for any of the civil construction or engineering structures. In the past 40 years, I have been associated with almost all the major projects in Bahrain, like the Sheikh Issa Bridge, Sheikh Khalifa Bridge, Sitra Bridges, Al Moed Towers, Bahrain Financial Harbour, World Trade Center, City Center, Seif Mall, Sea Flyovers, then Sheikh Khalifa Port, then industrial structures like Alba, Port Line 3 to 6. Airport modernization program, Babco modernization program, and most of the power stations since 1980. In other words, I am very proud to be part of participating and witnessing the growth of Bahrain. On the topic of the Indian-Bahrain relationship, as everyone knows, the ties are from historic time onwards, which is 5,000 years back. From the Dilmun civilization used to be the regular trade partner of the Indus Valley civilization in India, where commerce and trade was the harbinger that connected nations and kept them in a harmonious centuries. So a historical content always creates a level of comfort among the countries. Of course, the Kingdom of Bahrain is the pearl of the Gulf, which is a unique as the pearls were nurtured in the bosom of the sea. A country which positions itself as a business-friendly nation, which offers ample scope for bilateral trade and any country and with any country, and especially a country like India, with whom there are deep-rooted ties. In the modern day, relationship between these nations grew stronger through platforms that evolved from diplomacy, trade and commerce, technology, investment, infrastructure, education and culture, and human resources. India and Bahrain relations received fresh impetus from the oil boom of early 1970s. Relative prosperity and higher standard of living in Bahrain boosted global imports of goods and services, including from India. Bahrain government's policy of industrial diversification also played an important role in enhancing economic cooperation between India and Bahrain. More than anything else, new job opportunities attracted a large number of Indian expatriates to Bahrain. Bahrain serves as the gateway to the GCC market because of its locations and transportation availability. Recent decades have seen some very important developments. During the visit of His Majesty Bahrain King Ahmed bin Isa Al Khalifa to the India in February 2014, the two sides highlighted the importance of strengthening cooperation in the field of information and communications, information and broadcasting, among others. Memorandum of Associations on the establishment of Joint High Commission was also agreed in 2014 February. MOU on Water Resources Development and Management Agreement on cooperation in combating international terrorism, transnational organized crimes and trafficking in illicit drugs, narcotics, etc. Then the first ever visit by an Indian Prime Minister, when Honorable Prime Minister Sri Mohammed Narendra Modi ji to Bahrain in August 2019, during which I met him on the sidelines, and he expressed his appreciation for the hospitality of Bahrain and his keenness to develop bilateral relations between Bahrain and India. In between, there have been numerous visits by other prominent leaders of both countries, always taking the relations forward. These visits signify an important element in the cooperation initiative, that of trust and cooperations between and mutual respect. Advancing on present bonding between the two countries, powerful ties will be witnessed in time to come. I will probably share about 8 areas where I believe there is immense potential for bilateral cooperation between India and Bahrain. Number 1 is renewable energy, such as solar, wind, and clean hydrogen. India and Bahrain have already embarked on a program for promoting this bilateral cooperation in this field. As you know, Bahrain is naturally blessed with ample sunlight, and India is trying to be a pioneer in solar energy technology, along with its commitment to reduce carbon emissions, and their mutual cooperation in the base of sharing experience, expertise, and best practices in natural outcome. Number 2 is the area of medical technology transfer. The COVID has made Bahrain think about developing capabilities in the medical field, and India is considered as the pharmacy of the world. So another natural area for increased cooperation. Number 3 is the area of construction, which is close to my heart. Construction is one of the prominent sectors in the country, yet it has been battled to get fine and simple technology on site. But now it is expected that there will be wider use of technology and construction and management, wider construction and construction management in the future, as companies realize long-term efficiency and cost savings of such technique. This is where importance of collaboration on these two countries becomes paramount to drive quality and productivity. All through the industry. Bahrain's preference for environment-friendly buildings such as the Bahrain World Trade Center can be looked at by India in its own construction sector. Number 4 is the space technology, with a recent foray into space by neighboring country like UAE. If Bahrain wants to explore an entry into this space, it can work with India, which is a pioneer in cost-effective space program. MOU of cooperation in this and exploration and use of outer space for peaceful purposes is already in place. Number 5 is the space of finance and taxation professionals. As Bahrain introduced its own tax regime, especially with the introduction of VAT in the recent years, it can work with India in this area, as India is a country with vast experience and managing complex taxation and rolling out efficient tax program. It is my understanding that India has avoidance of double taxation and prevention of fiscal evasion agreement with all GCC countries except Bahrain. This may kindly be noted by the authorities to pursue further so that it will be useful to the trade. Number 6, both Bahrain and India plays a significant amount of stress in the field of education and development of human capital. It is a bit of anomaly that Bahrain does not have more specialized education institutes. It can easily pitch itself to be an educational hub, attracting talents from across the Middle East, and India can again be a natural partner in developing this ecosystem. Number 7 is the information technology. India has been an IT hub for many years, and Bahrain has placed significant focus in this area, especially with the setup of fintech bay and other technology setups. Other developing technologies are like artificial intelligence, data centers, cloud computing, and has immense scope for cooperation. Number 8 is the tourism. This is another sector that Bahrain government wants to focus as part of its diversification drive to move away from the oil-based economy. A country with its massive population of over 1.3 billion people is a natural target for tourism. Considering the close ties between the two countries and the large Indian diaspora present here, tourism ties could be developed significantly. Currently, medical tourism to India is a popular avenue, which could further be increased, and as I mentioned earlier. Although I have highlighted 8 areas, there are of course many other areas of cooperation possible, as such oil and gas, communication technology, infrastructure, investments, food processing, and sports. In conclusion, I want to emphasize on the doctrine that India has been propagating, that of Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, which means the world is one family. Bahrain, for its part, has been one of the most liberal countries in this region with its legacy of diversity and acceptance. Therefore, I am of the opinion that bilateral cooperation boost between these two countries is not a question of if, but when, and it is a question of how rather than how much, that of how much. As someone who considers Bahrain as the second home, me and many others like me would be happy to see this bilateral cooperation between our two countries being moved forward to the higher level. And we are willing to play our part in realizing this dream. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Babu Rajan, for that very insightful and holistic look at Bahraini-India relations. And it's good to see that you have touched upon your field of expertise, which is construction, and how you've contributed to a lot of the key infrastructure projects within the Kingdom of Bahrain. Now we will open the floor to Mr. Yusuf Salahudeen. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May peace and the blessing of Almighty be upon you. It is a privilege to be here with you all today, and I would like to thank Derasat, Bahrain Center, for opportunity to share with you some of historical facts about relationship between Kingdom of Bahrain and India, which start beginning of ages ago. But I am focusing more in the beginning of 19th to mid 20th centuries. We call it the golden era of pearl trading. Trading between Bahrain and India started as a shipping transportation, mainly to Calicut in Malabar, Gujarat, which was the economical capital of India then. And by the third quarter of 19th centuries, Bombay, which is known as Mumbai now, become the main business hub for the merchant. It is held because from the infrastructure at that time, which we call very modern. Before the steamship entered in the Gulf, around 1870s,
I'm sorry, can you just raise your voice a little bit, please?
Sorry?
Could you just raise your voice a little bit, please, so the audience have a...
Yes. Okay, thank you very much.
Apologies.
Before steamship enter in the Gulf around 1870s, people used to travel by dhows, which used to sail with the help of wind. Jum'a Ibrahim al-Tamimi had dhows yard in Bahrain, and his son Abdullah and Abdurrahman were visiting India many times as they were dealing with pearl and pearl shells. They exported to India and import wood and materials from India for building the ships. This is since end of 19th centuries. Many of other merchants had their own dhows, which travel around the Gulf, India, and East Africa, and some of them appointed their sons or relatives in different ports, mainly in Calicut and in Bombay. Majority of the merchants were settled in Muhammad Ali Road and surrounding, and it's become a memorable place in their lives. Majority of the Bahraini and the Gulf always remember Muhammad Ali Road. Many Bahraini pearl merchants migrated to India with their families during mid-19th centuries, as most of the merchants were dealing with pearl, and they settled in Bombay and also Hyderabad and Malabar. Some of them returned having spent fruitful years in India, and some of them never returned. They lived, died, and were buried in India. Also, there were many Bahraini who found their life partner from India, get married, and settled in India. I managed to get documents dated 1809 that Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Latif al-Mashari settled in India, and there were other people before that time, but I don't have any official documents for this. In the beginning 19th centuries, businessmen from United States, Europe settled in Bombay, like Rosenthal, Cartier, Herbert Habib, and others, and they, with some Indian traders, used to visit Bahrain to buy pearls. Also, a good number of Indians migrated to Bahrain and established successful businesses, and many of them chose Bahrain as their home. Most of the traders from Bahrain and Gulf countries carried out many charity activities, and some of them built guest houses called Musafir Khana. For the visitors, they let the visitor to stay there free of charge. Among of them, Muhammad Ahmed Hijris, who built a mosque in Bombay, which still exists. The pearl trade was hit in the First and the Second World War. However, the biggest hit was from 1928 to 1931, which was called Black Friday in the United States, when the stock exchange collapsed. And before that time, the culture pearl was introduced from Japan, and that one was a really hit for the trade business. In 1946, before independence, the Indian government imposed heavy taxes on all imported items, especially the jewelry. And that was another hit for the pearl traders, as India was the biggest market of the pearl. Apart from trade, people also traveled to India for education. According to the record, Ali Ahmed Yatim, along with Khalil Ibrahim Kano, were the first two students to travel to Aligarh University in 1908. The university was founded, as you know, by Sir Sayyid Ahmed Khan in 1875. My grandfather, Ahmed bin Hassan Ibrahim, with Jasim Muhammad Kano and Ali Muhammad Kano, went to Aligarh for 4 years and returned to Bahrain in 1914. After that, more students went to Aligarh and other university. Muayyad Ahmed al-Muayyad went to New Delhi in 1938, and Salman Ahmed Gegiso traveled before him, and Qasim Behzad, who considered the first doctor graduate from India. Later on, many people went to India for medical treatment Also, Bombay became a place for exiled politicians as they were against the British government. The first among them was Qasim Ahmed al-Shirawi in 1921 and Saad al-Shamlan in mid-1923, and Sheikh Abdul Wahab al-Zayani with his friend Ahmed bin Lahid Abu Flasa by end of 1923. Al-Zayani filed a case against the British government and he won the case. But he died before he came back to Bahrain, and he buried in Bombay 1925. This, I mention it, it shows to you what's kind of relation between Bahrain and the Gulf with India. Many musicians, poets went to Bombay, and one of them he sang a song, famous song called Al-Markab al-Hindi Budaglatain. The Daglatain means the ship with the two poles. There is Arabic saying, Al-Hind Hindak, Ida Qal ma Indak, which means if you have less fortune, go to India. Such was opportunity India provided for traders and the businessmen. Our famous poet Ibrahim Al-Arayyad and Salim Ahmed Al-Arayyad, who is considered the first lawyer in Bahrain, both were born in India from Bahraini families and studied in India. Sultan bin Muhammad bin Ali al-Manna'i wrote a famous book on pearl way in 1886, and this book became a reference for the pearl merchant and for the government officials to get the standard weight of the pearl, and it was approved by British government. Muhammad Abdullah al-Manna'i refurbished this book twice as the original became very rare. Muhammad al-Manna'i was the first person who studied at Pune Institute for Jewelry Design in 1947. And he continued pearl business started by his father and grandfather more than 200 years. Before establishing diplomatic relationship in 1971, both countries, even before the diplomatic relations start, both countries as leaders and citizens have enjoyed a very warm relationship. Former Indian Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and Shri Mati Indira Gandhi had stopped over in Bahrain during their frequent flight to Europe. In 1981, the late His Highness Sheikh Isa bin Salman Al Khalifa, ruler of Bahrain at that time, visited India. In 2014, His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa visited India. In 2019, Indian Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi visited Bahrain as the first official visit by Indian Prime Minister to the country. Before the visit was not official, except this is the visit from Indian Prime Minister. His Royal Highness Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, Crown Prince and Prime Minister, and the late Prime Minister, His Royal Highness Prince Khalifa bin Salman Al Khalifa, had paid an official visit to India. I am fully confident that the warm relationship between countries and between the people will further prosper in the years to come. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May peace and a blessing of Almighty be upon you. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yusuf Salahudeen, for that very personalized take on the Bahrain-India relations. You mentioned a lot of key figures within Bahraini society, both past and present, and we really appreciate your experience within this field. Unfortunately, Dr. Omar could not be here live with us due to a previous commitment, so we apologize for that, and we were able to record his intervention, and we will play it momentarily. Please stand by.
And to those in India and to my fellow panelists, I apologize for my inability to attend today. I had an urgent, an unforeseen matter that I had to attend to. But I very much hope that you enjoy today's event and that something positive can come from this discussion. The general message I wish to convey in today's talk is that Bahrain and India complement one another economically, and that they're a good cultural fit, and that as a consequence, logically, they should deepen relations. Let me start with the first point, which is how they complement one another economically. India, as we are all aware, and I apologize for repeating any of the statistics that may have already been mentioned, but they're certainly worth reiterating. India is a huge economy. It's the sixth in the world. It has a GDP of approximately $2.5 trillion. And it's just a huge market. Secondly, it has good innovation levels, especially given its income level. So the most widely used indicator for global innovation is the Global Innovation Index. And in 2020, India ranked 48 in the world in Global Innovation Index. It also actually ranked third out of 29 lower middle income countries, indicating that among its group and in light of the economic situation it faces, it's a very good innovator. And what's particularly important about India's innovation is that it has a productive innovation infrastructure. And by that, I mean that if you look at the Global Innovation Index, it's actually broken down into two sub-indices. It has innovation inputs and innovation outputs. In the case of innovation inputs, it ranks lower than it does in its outputs. And what that means is that when it spends money on innovation, it gets higher than average return on that money on the infrastructure spending, on the education investments, and so on and so forth. It produces more given how much it allocates to the process of innovation than does the average country. And this is in contrast to the GCC, which is the opposite, which I'll come back to in a moment. In addition, as you're all aware, India has a large population. It's the second biggest country in the world, population-wise, 1.4 billion. And finally, the other noteworthy characteristic for the Indian economy is that it has low capital. And by that, I mean, it has an investment gap, an investment deficit. If we use a simple measure such as the World Bank Logistics Index, it's ranked 52nd in the world in infrastructure. And infrastructure problems are particularly acute, for example, in some of the urban centers, which have experienced high levels of inward migration during the last half century and have not been able to, have not witnessed commensurate levels of investment. In contrast, Bahrain is a small economy, $35 billion. That's about 0.15% of the Indian economy. More importantly, Bahrain as an innovator is not ranked particularly highly in the world. It has serious, difficulties in innovating. It's ranked 79th in the world in GII. And as I mentioned earlier, in the case of India, it is reverse of India in the sense that its outputs rank is lower than its inputs rank. So when Bahrain spends money on infrastructure, on education, on researchers and engineers, the return it gets is lower than the global average. And as a consequence, you see Bahrain does not have high levels of patents, industrial designs, and commercial innovations. Of a small population, 1.6 million, about 0.1% of the size of the Indian population, and we have in general high capital because of the oil income, the hydrocarbon income that Bahrain has accrued or amassed over the last century. We have good infrastructure. And we've historically had a current account surplus as part of the fixed exchange rate, and as a consequence, we've been exporting capital and investing in other countries. And then as an ancillary important point is that Bahrain is part of the Gulf Cooperation Council, which means that it's part of the single market and operates as a gateway to the GCC economy, which is $1.6 trillion in size. So it's not far behind the Indian economy. Now, in addition to being economically complementary, as I'm sure my colleagues in the panel have already explained, they have a great cultural complementarity too. Bahrainis and Indians have lived together, worked together for decades and beyond, and get on with each other very well. So then the question comes, if they're economically complementary, if they're culturally complementary, what should they do together? Well, the first thing, and I'm sure this was mentioned by my colleagues, is there needs to be a free trade agreement between India and Bahrain, or India and the GCC preferably. GCC India trade was $100 billion, I think, in about 2018. So it's big trade. India has FTAs with several big countries. So it has a reputation as being a country that has a protectionist trade policy. But actually it has a free trade agreement with Japan, with Malaysia, with the Mercosur in South America. And it should be high on the priority of the GCC countries to get on that list of FTA partners with India. And in light of the size of the two economies, in light of the diversity of the differences of the two economies, that is going to be a big benefit to both sides. Ideally, the biggest, the biggest benefits associated with FTAs arise when two diverse or two economies that are very different in nature integrate, because that creates the opportunities for exchange, for integration. Second, Bahraini innovation policymakers and stakeholders need to visit India and benefit from this knowledge on how to make a good innovation ecosystem. Now, this is India, as I mentioned above, has good innovation, has been successful innovator, especially in light of the resources it allocates to it. And that presents a great opportunity for Bahrainis to learn and benefit from. Now, that doesn't mean, India is not Switzerland, it's not Norway, it's not the USA when it comes to innovation, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing to learn from visiting India. What works in Switzerland, what works in Norway, what works in Bahrain, all of which are countries which Bahrain has a good relationship with, doesn't necessarily work in Bahrain. And it's important, innovation requires a very tailored and specific environment, commercial and innovation environment. And so Bahraini policymakers should look to learn from as diverse a range of countries as possible, which have been successful in innovation, and that includes India. And I urge them to visit and see how this country has continued to produce world-class innovations despite all the challenges, economic challenges it has faced. Third, Bahraini should look to partner with Indian innovators, as co-investors. Bahrainis have capital, but also with an eye to importing these ideas into Bahrain and the GCC. Many of the problems that Indian innovators try to solve are problem for their own economy, that faced by regular citizens and residents of India, are problems that exist in the GCC. And so it's highly likely that those ideas will be of value in the GCC, and Bahrain and the Gulf can seize the advantage compared to Western economies in importing these innovations by forging and developing good relations with Indian innovators. Finally, Bahrain should grant permanent residency to Indian innovators and allow them to contribute to the innovation ecosystem in Bahrain. Bahrain is yet to to have the policy of permanent residency or the golden visa that UAE and Saudi Arabia have. But I urge authorities to consider that, especially in the case of Indian innovators, because it's very important for an innovator to feel secure and at home in the country which they are taking their innovations. And in light of the strong personal and cultural ties between India and Bahrain, I am confident that were such permanent residency to be afforded and offered to Indian innovators and entrepreneurs, that opportunity would be seized, and you'd see important partnerships growing between Bahraini and Indian innovators in Bahrain and in India. And the net contribution to the innovation ecosystem in Bahrain would certainly be positive. So to sum up, these are two countries which have had a great historical relationship, and it's time to take it to the next level. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Dr. Omar for recording his intervention. And due to some time constraints, we'll just jump into the questions segment. I know Mr. Yusuf has to leave very soon, so I'll just begin with you. Sir, you discussed a lot about the historical foundations between the Arab Gulf states and India in the past 500 years. What do you have any personal anecdotes or any, what do you find to be the most, that establishes the foundations between the two regions?
Yes, thank you. I think the future with India, same as before. We are always in a trading, we link together, plus the social life. So I think it is important that to make some special projects in Bahrain, as our friend mentioned, that to do something about the vaccination and about the solar energy. And there is something also very important, maybe you'll surprise about it. Why we do not start to replant for the pear. Pear industry is not small things. It was very important. It is hit during last centuries, but now the people start is coming, and still India is the biggest market for the pear in the whole world. I think we can do something in the Gulf to restart the pear business. And of course, and the other industrial area, and especially as what they said about the agriculture and the food and the other things. And I think India is next to me. The relation we have long time ago, the mentality, the feeling each other's people, the Bahraini or the Gulf people, when they go to the Gulf, when they go to India, they feel at home. Same thing, our friend from India, when they come to the Gulf, they feel at home. And I think we all together as GCC, if we open let's say, more channels with our friend Indian and the people in the Gulf, I think we can have more business in the future. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And thank you for joining us today for your time. We appreciate your experts' opinions and the history and the cultural aspects of Bahrain-India relations. Thank you so much, sir. And now I'd like to pose a couple of questions actually to Ambassador Dr. Mohan. Sandeep from the Gulf Daily News poses some interesting questions. He wanted you to elaborate more about the e-migrate to LMRA aspect that you mentioned before. And his other question is actually about the proposal of the trilateral agreement between Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and India. If you think if it's more feasible to achieve that rather than an India GCC FTA. The floor is yours, sir.
So thank you very much. And hello, Sandeep. It's good to hear from you after a very long time. And those are two valid questions. I want to begin by saying that when I reached Bahrain, end of 2010, and I wanted to get a fix on the number of Indians who come every year seeking employment to Bahrain, it was a black hole. Nobody had an idea. There were some vague figures available in India. There was, of course, the LMRA figures, but we did not have a good fix. Now, since then, India has embarked on an experiment called e-migrate. The E stands for electronics. So the idea is that when somebody from Kerala or somebody from Mumbai, somebody from Uttar Pradesh goes to Bahrain, everything is loaded electronically in the Delhi area. For example, if you leave from the Delhi airport, gradually we were to extend it to other international airports so that we have a clear idea that this person is going on an employment visa to Bahrain on a valid contract. And if this electronic portal can be linked to the LMRA's portal, then the discrepancies can be explained and both countries will have a good fix on the number of Indians who are living in Bahrain, who seek employment, who leave Bahrain, because there is also a fair number which keeps going back. So, and of course, deaths and other things. So this was fairly revolutionary. And I'm glad to note that the Joint Commission meeting held in April talks of efforts will be made by both sides to link the portal. I think this must be done forthwith. We have no time to lose. So that was my point, Sandeep. Your second question is an interesting one. Frankly, if you ask me, I would prefer a GCC India FTA. And this is what I would request our Bahraini friends who are retaining the rotating presidency of GCC this year to make a last-ditch attempt. But if that is not possible, because to be honest, there have been some challenges within GCC, lately in terms of integration and so on. If that is not possible, I want to convey to my Bahraini friends that India-Saudi ties and India-UAE ties are galloping ahead. This is a fact. It is really going forward very, very fast. As a person who loves Bahrain deeply because I spent 4.5 years there, I don't want Bahrain to be left behind. It is also my understanding that Bahrain will have no problem in actually considering this area as a joint economic space, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. I'm not asking both countries to sacrifice their political sovereignty. We are talking pure and simple trade and investment zone, that's all. And this will, I think, enable an easier time for both India, but Saudis and the Bahrainis. But we have to sit together, or at least at an initial stage, I would request our Bahraini friends to sit with Saudis and see how this is, and then sit with India. It is only then, I think, that we will be able to move forward. I'm saying this frankly because waiting eternally for a GCC-India FTA, I don't know if that's a good idea. It'll be like waiting for Godot, if you know what I mean. So I think it's much better for countries which are willing. I see a willingness in Bahrain to cooperate with India. I see a willingness in Saudi Arabia to take the ties to great levels. So why not capitalize on it and go forward without trying to coordinate between the 6 Gulf countries and so on? So that was my point, Sandeep. But thank you for those questions.
Thank you very much for your response, Ambassador Dr. Mohan. Ambassador Deepa, actually, I wanted to pose a question to you, or from the audience, actually. What are some interested things to look out for in India-GCC relations besides trade and Diaspora relations?
Yes, thank you. I think I mentioned it in passing. And one of the new areas that has come up really is security and defense. This is not really a very, very new area, but this is, I think what we do understand is that we do share common security concerns. It is a common security environment and common threats. I think Mohan mentioned about us being part of the Indo-Pacific, and therefore there has been over a period of time, there always were some kind of contacts. But for example, recently we have had a chief of army staff who has for the first time ever visited the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And now what is happening, I'll quickly tell you in the area of defense, is that we are looking more and more at exchanges of senior officials meeting, of course, but then joint exercises together. We're also looking really very interestingly at joint development of different kinds of arms in the defense production area and purchases from one another. So I think this is something that is extremely new that we have to look at in terms of the relationship between India and the GCC. So if you look at trade, you look at diaspora, I think this is one thing that is important. We also have to look in some ways at some of the areas that were some of the subjects that were raised. And this is really a new area. And I think this is to really do with India's strengths as, this whole startup ecosystem that we have, digitization. So what has happened the post-pandemic is that the whole world is talking about digitization. And I think this is an area certainly where India and Bahrain can work together. The GCC, of course, but I think India and Bahrain, there are a lot of possibilities in that area. I think none of us really talked much about the cultural part of the relationship. This is important. Culture also means that there should be more contact among our people. So maybe more in terms of education. I do know that young people in Bahrain now look more to the West. But as we just heard from one of our panelists, there was a time when we were really Bahrainis did come, they look to India. But where we can work, where you all can help us and we can help is in skilling. This is another great importance area that is there for both our countries. So I think really the canvas is very vast.
Thank you very much for your insights, Ambassador Deepa. Actually, I think Dr. Mohan, would you like to say something, sir?
Just a minute, if you will. There is an interesting question from Ms. Meera Ravi, also happens to be a friend of mine. She asks whether the pandemic has created a situation and how this will impact future relations. So very briefly, and not to take too much time, I'm of the view that the pandemic actually provides an opportunity. I tend to view the crisis as an opportunity. And one of the opportunities that I had mentioned was creating vaccine manufacturing facilities in Bahrain. The other thing is that people in India will even be more ready now to go to the Gulf to work. That is an opportunity as far as I'm concerned. Thirdly, I do believe, and I'm an optimist when it comes to India and the GCC bouncing back because of the fundamental resilience of our people. I believe that both the people of the Gulf and people of India are fundamentally resilient, and that it's only a matter of time before our economies pick up. So I wouldn't want to be too pessimistic about the impact of the pandemic. I think we should make use of this time to prepare for the post-pandemic period, keep the infrastructure ready so that we can then exploit the economic opportunities that present themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think you're absolutely spot on when it comes to how the COVID-19 presents a lot of new opportunities. Of course, the challenges are obvious, but I think this will be a major lesson for the entire world on what strategic components of within the health center and different infrastructure needed to accommodate these health needs in the future in order to deter future pandemics as well. Mr. Babu Rajan, actually, I would very much like your input on this. We are very much aware of how Bahrain-India relations continue to blossom throughout history. But I wanted your specific input within the particular field of construction and engineering, actually. How have Indian companies and technologies contributed towards mega projects and reclamation projects within Bahrain?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Obviously, as you'll be knowing, since 1983-84, lot of reclamation projects has been taken place in Bahrain. Mainly, if you remember the Pearl Roundabout, anything north of that was a sea, for example. And if you come to the other side, Gulf Hotel was on the seashore. Then if you go to the Hid area, the whole of Hid is reclaimed. So naturally, now also, if we can look at it, Delmonia, Amwash Islands, then Durat al-Bahrain, Durat al-Khalij, all these developments, and now again, lot of projects are going on with the land reclamation. Mainly nowadays, if you look at the east of Sitra, the major housing project which is being built by the Chinese company, and east Hid also lot of housing developments. But as lot of major reclamation projects are being done, and it has taken place. Unfortunately, from India's contribution to these sort of projects is very, very less, very less. But it's not that India doesn't have the capability. Maybe they are not exposed to or they were not asked to involve into such projects. I don't know. But our general attitudes, to be very frank, they are very happy to work inside India and they don't want to exploit to the outside. But as I said, the housing sector, lot of EPC contracts are going on even in Bahrain, where I'm quite sure a lot of major companies from India can easily participate in that one and do a lot of PPP projects or EPC contracts where they can invest and do for the development of the Bahrain. But as I said earlier, most of these companies, they don't have that sort of initiative. So naturally, from the Indian side, I would say that it is very important to inform them what are the opportunities and how they can work and contribute to the development of not only Bahrain, I'm talking about all the GCC countries. If you look at the other countries like China, Korea, they invest a lot of money and they do a lot of major projects in this part of the world. So I'm quite sure our capability is so much more than that. You can easily contribute much more to the quality, to the cost effectiveness and all. So naturally, that is some area which we should embark on that. But unfortunately, that has not happened so far. Construction, not only in the reclamation, any of the major projects, okay, there are few companies working here and there occasionally, but that's all. But I don't know what the reason why they don't be here again on major projects and then contribute to each other where the technology can be transferred very well and it will be useful to both countries. That is what I would say on that particular sector, construction industry, on major projects.
Thank you very much for your input on that. I know maybe more recently, Bahrain might have looked to other sources when it comes to reclamation projects, but it seems that Indian companies have actually had a very strong footprint within major projects within Bahrain, and we're always be appreciated for that. I believe that our time is up for today's virtual Think Talk. I wanted to thank each and every single panelist who joined us today, who contributed to this very fruitful conversation. Thank you very much for your inputs. Thank you for your time, Ambassador Deepa, Ambassador Dr. Mohan, Mr. Babu Raja, and Mr. Yusuf Salahudeen, and Dr. Omar, and as well as Ambassador Suri and Dr. Ahmed for their opening welcoming remarks. Please be sure to follow Derasat BH for all the latest events on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And we look forward to welcoming audiences to future events. Thank you and goodbye.